Join the ToI community here to receive these editorial notes as they become available. Ashamed of the rise in attacks on Israel on multiple fronts, he blamed the opposition and falsely accused his predecessors of emboldening our enemies. It misrepresented voluntary reservists as rejectors, who made it clear that they would not serve a dictatorship. He supported the burning police minister's proposal to create a new military force. He ignored concerns President of United States about deteriorating health Israeli democracy under his leadership. He has accused the European leaders who have hosted him in recent weeks of hypocrisy. But while he was covering it up with a few short sentences towards end of his latest rhetorical attack on the nation, main headline of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech and press conference Monday night was that he reversed his 2-week decision before and reappointing Yoav Gallant as defense minister. In fact, however, it was Gallant, his colleague in Likud party, appointed on March 25 to make sure that Israel's enemies cannot defeat us, who gave the strongest warning of disintegration of this nation. Gallant told Israelis world-watching that national conflict, triggered by Netanyahu's plan to politicize and sterilize judiciary, has leaked into IDF security agencies. And Gallant solemnly stressed that this constitutes a clear, immediate and tangible threat to the security of the state. Gallant was not fired because his dire public warning was false and alarming. He was fired for being true, as highlighted by a shower of 34 rockets from Lebanon on Thursday, the worst since 2006. He was fired for telling the public that he had been elected, ignoring the Prime Minister's concerns. The judicial overhaul was fired for its desire to halt the legislative offensive and instead allow time for a negotiated reform process and the weakening national divide to heal. He was fired, perhaps most, for defying Netanyahu's word, Mr. Security, credentials. After keeping Gallant in appalling obscurity for 2 weeks, head country's security hierarchy, cold-shouldered at events they both attended, he didn't know minute by minute whether he would be released even in midst of a wave terror. Netanyahu had no choice but to appoint his defense minister, if it was too late. Concluded that it was not. It had taken him a day to make political reckoning on Monday, March 27, that his dismissal of Gallant was such an extreme step, even for some of hitherto generously supportive coalition colleagues, that he would indeed need a demonstration. The reason he supported a dialogue on judicial revision was that, at that anxious moment, he could not be sure that the first key law in the revision package would pass by a Knesset majority. But it took him 2 weeks to come to conclusion that the public would not forgive him for sacking Chief of Defense. 2 weeks of ongoing protests and rapidly falling numbers in opinion polls, which he claims he doesn't mind. Yoav Horowitz, one the former chiefs of staff who is now participating in protests against him, evaluated in an interview with Haaretz on Friday that Netanyahu had come to see himself as something between an emperor and the head of superpower, and was hypocritical. He's on his way to becoming Israel's Vladimir Putin. I joined him for talks with Putin, said his former boss, Horowitz. I saw her worshipping and fawning over her. I saw how much you wanted to be like him. Horowitz also predicted that Netanyahu will not rest until the entire judicial system on the ground begs for pardon for prosecuting him. The core law that will truly stage judiciary, the law that gives the coalition almost absolute control over judicial appointments, has been locked and loaded, formally submitted to Knesset for final readings, and is soon ready to be enacted. Don't notice. At the same time, a dialogue on judicial reform advocated by Gallant and voices in virtually every part of our society is taking place under the auspices of President Isaac Herzog. In a Q&A after Monday night's speech, Netanyahu was asked to be declared persona non grata at the White House after Biden called on him to get away from current revision legislation and refused to extend the president's term. Invitation to visit. The Prime Minister used an interesting formulation in response reporters' question, characteristically bellicose, but seemingly reassuring. I assume you'll have a deal, he said to questioner, apparently referring dialogue at presidential residence. Netanyahu his coalition allies promptly and vehemently rejected Herzog's own plan for alternative judicial reform last month, the representatives Netanyahu sent to the Herzog talks are credible loyalists committed to radical legislation in its current form. With Netanyahu promising to pass, one way or another, despite having suspended revision 2 weeks ago, there is no reason to doubt that law will be revived after return of Knesset at end of month. Continuing Monday night's theme, Netanyahu can easily hold the opposition accountable for the disagreeable terms for reform, highlight his coalition's decisive electoral victory, point to mass pro-revision protests currently being planned, and pass legislation to turn Israel into a tyranny. Majority. Or, as in case of the reinstated Yoav Gallant, he could reverse course, no matter how belated and improbable, and initiate healing process that would cynically rebuild a nation that would save its cohesion, unity, resilience. Let's remove and thus save economy, ties to allies, and deterrence against these emboldened enemies. He asked on Monday night. Better late is much better than never.